Rodney Alcala, born Rodrigo Jacques Alcala, was an American serial unaliver and convicted ex-offender who was sentenced to unalive in California for 7 unalivings committed between 1977 and 1979. He also pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 25 years to life for 2 further unalivings committed in New York. He was also indicted for an unaliving in Wyoming, although the charges filed were dropped. While he has been conclusively linked to 8 unalivings, the true number of victims remain unknown and could be as high as 130. He compiled a collection of more than 1,000 photographs of women, teenage girls and boys, many in sexually explicit poses. In 2016, he was charged with the 1977 unaliving of a woman identified in one of his photos. He is known to have assaulted one other photo subject, and police have speculated that there could be or unaliving of victims as well. Prosecutors said that he with his victims, strangling them until they lost consciousness and waiting until they were revived, sometimes repeating the process several times before he would eventually unalive them. The police detective described him as and others have compared him to Ted Bundy. Alcala is often referred to as he appeared on the television show The Dating Game in 1978 during the midst of his unaliving spree. Rodney Alcala was born in San Antonio, Texas, the third of 4 children born to Mexican-American couple Raul Alcala Bagua and Ana Maria Gutierrez. In 1951, his father moved the family to Mexico, then abandoned them 3 years later. In 1954, aged 11, his mother moved him and his 2 sisters to suburban LA. He was said to be an academically gifted student who was reasonably popular among his peers and was supported by his family. He attended various private schools during his youth before graduating from Cantwell Sacred Heart of Mary High School. He was on the yearbook planning committee and on the track and cross-county teams. In 1961, at the age of 17, he joined the United States Army to become a paratrooper and served as a clerk. During his service, he was noted by his commanding officer as being manipulative, vindictive, and insubordinate. He was disciplined on several occasions for assaulting young women. In 1964, after what was described as a nervous breakdown, during which he went AWOL and hitchhiked from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to his mother's house in California, he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and estimated to have an IQ of 135 by a military psychiatrist. He was subsequently discharged from the army on medical grounds. Other diagnoses later proposed by various psychiatric experts at his trials included narcissistic personality disorder, BPD, malignant narcissism with psychopathy, and esciable sadism comorbidities. After being discharged from the army, he graduated from the UCLA School of Arts and Architecture. He later studied film under Roman Polanski at New York University. On the 25th of September 1968, a passing motorist named Donald Haynes called police after witnessing Alcala lure Tali Shapiro, aged 8 at the time, into his Hollywood apartment. Shapiro, who was residing in the Chateau Marmont with her family, was approached by Alcala on her way to school when he pulled up beside her in his car and asked if she needed a ride. Shapiro initially refused, but when she heard him say that he knew her parents, she got in the car. Alcala then took her to his apartment where he told Shapiro that he wanted to show her a picture. When the police arrived, Shapiro was found alive in a pool of her own blood, having been hard and beaten with a steel bar, and Alcala had fled. Shapiro was in a coma for 32 days and spent months in recovery. To evade the arrest warrant stemming from the Shapiro assault, Alcala left California and enrolled at NYU using the name John Berger. Cornelia Crilly, a 23-year-old Trans World Airlines flight attendant, was found hard and unalived in a Manhattan apartment on the 12th of June 1971. Alcala had strangled her with her own nylon stockings, leaving her unalived in her apartment at 427 East 38th Street. It is believed that Crilly met Alcala when she moved into a new apartment and she accepted his help in moving some furniture. Her unaliving remained unsolved until 2011. In 1971, Alcala obtained a job at a New Hampshire arts camp, Camp New Beginnings, in the village of Georges Mills on Lake Sunapee. as a counsellor for children, using a slightly different alias, John Berger. The FBI added him to its 10 most wanted fugitives in early 1971. A few months later, 2 campers at the camp noticed his photo on an FBI poster at the post office. That August, Alcala was arrested and extradited to California. By then, Tali Shapiro's parents had relocated their entire family to Mexico and refused to allow Shapiro to testify at the trial. Without their primary witness, prosecutors were unwilling to charge Alcala with an attempted unaliving. He was instead convicted of Child M, then a lesser charge, and sentenced to 3 years. He was paroled in 1974 after 34 months. Less than 2 months after his release, he was re-arrested and convicted for assaulting a 13-year-old girl identified in court records as Julie J., who had accepted what she thought would be a ride to school. He was then paroled after serving 2 years and released in 1977 as a registered S-offender. After his second release in 1977, his LA parole officer made the unusual and not very clever choice of permitting a repeat offender and a known flight risk to travel to New York City. New York Police Department investigators now believe that a week after returning to Manhattan, he unalived Ellen Jane Hover, 23-year-old daughter of nightclub owner Herman Hover, and goddaughter of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. She was last seen at a New York apartment on the 15th of July, 1977. Her date book showed that she had an appointment to meet with one John Berger that same day. Later in 1977, the FBI received a tip about Alcala's 1971 arrest in New Hampshire related to the Shapiro case in California. Alcala admitted to knowing Hover under questioning, but investigators couldn't arrest him since they had not found her body. Her remains were discovered in 1978, buried under heavy rocks on a hillside overlooking the Hudson River, near a location on the John D. Rockefeller estate, where an aspiring model would later report that Berger had taken photos of her. In 1977, he worked briefly at the Los Angeles Times as a typesetter, and he was interviewed by members of the Hillside Stranglers Task Force as part of their investigation into known S-offenders. Although he was ruled out as the Strangler, he was arrested and served a brief sentence for marijuana possession. During this period, he convinced hundreds of young men and women that he was a professional fashion photographer and took pictures of them for his portfolio. A Times co-worker later recalled that Alcala shared his photos with his workmates. She said, Leanne Leiden, who was 17 when Alcala photographed her in 1979, reported that Leiden further reported that the portfolio Alcala shared with her also included in 1979, in the midst of his killing spree, he was a contestant on the popular game show The Dating Game. Host Jim Lang introduced him as a Jed Miles, a fellow Bachelor contestant on that episode, later described Alcala as a with Alcala won the competition and a date with the episode's Bachelorette, Cheryl Bradshaw, who subsequently refused to go on a date with him because she found him creepy. On the 9th of November 1977, he murdered Jill Terry Barkham, an 18-year-old girl from Oneida, New York, and disposed of her body on a dirt path near Mulholland Drive in LA. Barkham was found in a knee-to-chest position and naked from the waist down. There were signs of SA and she'd been strangled with a pair of blue rope ties and beaten. She also had 3 bite marks on her right breast. Initially, authorities believed Barkham was a victim of the Hillside Strangler. However, after the arrests of Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono, neither of whom confessed to or were convicted of her murder, authorities determined that her case was unrelated. On the 16th of December 1977, 27-year-old nurse Georgia Marie Wickstead was discovered dead in a Malibu apartment. She was last seen when she drove another nurse, Barbara Gale, home from a bar, When Wickstead didn't show up for work the next day, Gail and her co-workers reported her missing. Police arrived at Wickstead's apartment to find signs of forced entry. Wickstead was posed naked on a bedroom floor, strangled with her nylons. She'd been essayed, her skull had been bashed, and her genitals had been mutilated. Prosecutors later used DNA evidence and a handprint found at the scene to convict Alcala. On the 24th of June 1978, Charlotte Lee Lamb, 31-year-old legal secretary from Santa Monica, was found dead in the laundry room of the apartment complex where she was living in El Segundo. She'd been essayed, beaten and strangled with a shoelace and was posed with her hands behind her back. DNA at the scene would match that of Alcala, and DNA on a pair of earrings found in his storage locker after Robin Christine Samso's 1979 murder would eventually prove to match Lamb's DNA. On the 14th of February 1979, Alcala picked up 15-year-old hitchhiker Monique Hoyt in Riverside County. He drove Hoyt to his apartment where he aired her. They then travelled to a secluded mountainous area in Joshua Tree, California, where Alcala took photos of her in her underwear as well as photos of him airing her once again. He bound and gagged her and began a sustained assault, which included further R and S. Alcala bludgeoned Hoyt in the head with a rock, but Hoyt luckily managed to escape when Alcala entered a gas station bathroom on the drive back to Riverside County. Hoyt filed a police report about her ordeal and Alcala was arrested, but his mother posted his bail. On the 13th of June 1979, Jill Marie Parenthau, 21-year-old computer key bench operator, left work early to go to a baseball game. When she didn't make it to work the following morning, police went to her Burbank apartment and found signs of forced entry. She was dead, naked on her bathroom floor. She'd been posed with pillows under her shoulders. She'd been essayed, beaten and strangled. Her killer cut himself crawling through a window, and blood evidence would later identify Alcala as the perpetrator. Parento's friend, Catherine Bryant, testified that she and Parento had met Alcala at a club several times before. On the 20th of June 1979, Robin Christine Samso, a 12-year-old girl from Huntington Beach, disappeared as she rode a borrowed bicycle from her Huntington Beach home to a ballet class. Her decomposing body was found 12 days later in the LA foothills, dumped off Santa Anita Canyon Road. She'd been beaten, aired and stabbed with a knife. Samson's friend told police that the strangler had approached them on the beach asking to take their pictures. Detectives circulated a sketch of the photographer and Alcala's parole officer recognised him. Alcala was arrested in July 1979 and held without bail. He went on trial for Samso's murder and was found guilty in May 1980 and sentenced to death in June. However, the verdict was overturned by the California Supreme Court in 1984 because jurors had been improperly informed of his prior S crimes. In May 1986, after a second trial virtually identical to the first except for the omission of the prior criminal record testimony, he was again convicted and sentenced to death in August. In 1992, the California Supreme Court upheld the verdict, but Alcala filed a federal habeas corpus petition. And in 2001, the United States District Court granted it, overturning Alcala's second conviction. That decision was upheld in 2003 by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals panel, in part because a witness was not allowed to support Alcala's contention that the park ranger who found Samso's body had been While preparing for their third prosecution in 2003, Orange County investigators learned that Alcala's DNA, sampled under a new state law over his objections, matched semen found at an murder scene of two women in LA. Additional evidence, including another cold case DNA match in 2004, led to Alcala's indictment for the murders of 4 additional women: Jill Barkham, Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, and Jill Parento. All of the bodies were found. Another pair of earrings found in Alcala's Seattle storage locker had residue that matched Lamb's DNA. During his incarceration between the second and third trials, Alcala wrote and self-published a book, You, the Jury, in which he claimed innocence in the Samso case and suggested a different suspect. He also filed 2 lawsuits against the California penal system for a slip-and-fall incident and for refusing to provide him a low-fat diet. In 2003, prosecutors entered a motion to join the Samso charges with those of the 4 newly discovered victims. Alcala's attorneys contested it. As one of them explained, In 2006, the California Supreme Court ruled over the prosecution's favor. In February 2010, Alcala stood trial on the 5 joined charges. For the third trial, Alcala elected to act as his own attorney. He took to the stand in his own defense and for 5 hours played the roles of both interrogator and witness, asking himself questions and addressing himself as in a deeper than normal voice, followed by answering them. During his self-questioning and answering session, he told jurors, often in a rambling monotone, that he was at Knott's Berry Farm applying for jobs as a photographer at the time Samso was kidnapped. He showed the jury a portion of his 1978 appearance on The Dating Game in an attempt to prove that the earrings found in his Seattle locker were his, not Samso's. Jed Mills, the actor who competed against Alcala on the show, told the reporter that earrings were not yet a socially acceptable accoutrement for men in 1978. He said, Alcala made no significant attempt to dispute the 4 added charges, other than assert that he couldn't remember killing any of the women. As part of his closing argument, he played the Arlo Guarneri song, Alice's Restaurant, in which the protagonist tells the psychiatrist that he wants to kill. After less than 2 days, the jury convicted him on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. A surprise witness during the penalty phase of the trial was Shapiro. Richard Rappaport, a psychiatrist paid by Alcala and the only defense witness, testified that BPD could explain Alcala's claims that he had no memory of committing the murders. The prosecutor argued that Alcala was a who in March 2010, Alcala was sentenced to death for a 3rd time. After his 2010 conviction, New York authorities announced that they would no longer pursue Alcala because of his status as a convict awaiting execution. Nevertheless, in January 2011, a Manhattan grand jury indicted him for the murders of Crilly and Hoover in 1971 and 1977. In June 2012, he was extradited to New York, where he initially entered not guilty pleas on both counts. In December 2012, he changed both pleas to guilty, citing a desire to return to California to pursue appeals on his death penalty conviction. On the 7th of January 2013, a Manhattan judge sentenced Alcala to an additional 25 years to life. The death penalty has not been an option in New York State since 2007. In March 2010, the Huntington Beach, California, and New York City police departments released 120 of Alcala's photographs and sought the public's help in identifying them in the hope of determining if any of the women and children he photographed were additional victims. Approximately 900 additional photos could not be made public, police said, because they were too sexually explicit. In the first few weeks, police reported that approximately 21 women had come forward to identify themselves and said they believed recognised loved ones who none of the photos were unequivocally connected to a missing person case or unsolved murder until 2013. 110 of the original photos remain posted online, and police continue to solicit the public's help with further identifications. Most of the subjects remain unidentified. Police fear that some of the subjects may be additional cold case victims. Following Alcala's death in 2021, 68-year-old Morgan Rowan contacted Steve Hodel, one of the original investigators in the Shapiro case, and described being attacked by Alcala in July 1968 when she was 16. Rowan claimed that while she was living in Hollywood, she was approached by Alcala at a teen nightclub on the Sunset Strip and entered his car believing he was driving to an IHOP restaurant. Instead, Alcala drove her to his apartment a few blocks away where he said he was having a party. When he arrived, Alcala dragged Rowan into his bedroom, barred the door, and beat and arred her. Rowan was rescued by friends and acquaintances who broke into the room through a window. Alcala fled, and Rowan was pulled from the apartment by her friends. In March 2011, investigators in Marin County, California, north side of San Francisco, announced that they were confident that Alcala was responsible for the 9th of October 1977 murder of 19-year-old Pamela Jean Pam Lamson, who disappeared after making a trip to Fisherman's Wharf to meet a man who offered to photograph her. Her battered, naked body was subsequently found in Marin County near a hiking trail. With no fingerprints or usable DNA, charges were never filed, but police claimed that there was sufficient evidence to convince them that Alcala committed the crime. In September 2016, Alcala was charged with the murder of 28-year-old Christine Ruth Thornton. Thornton and her lover moved away from their family to live in San Antonio, Texas. After they split up in Biloxi, Mississippi in June 1977, she was last seen hitchhiking and was never heard from again. In 2013, an image made public by Huntington Beach PD and NYPD of a dark-haired woman riding a motorcycle while wearing a yellow shirt was recognized by Thornton's sister. Her body was found in Seawater County, Wyoming along Interstate 80 in 1982, but wasn't identified until 2015 when DNA supplied by Thornton's relatives matched tissue samples from her remains. Alcala admitted to taking the photo but not to murdering the woman, who was approximately 6 months pregnant at the time of her death. Thornton is the first alleged murder victim linked to Alcala's photos made public in 2010. The 73-year-old Alcala was reportedly too ill to make the journey from California to Wyoming to stand trial on new charges. In 2010, Seattle police named Alcala as a person of interest in several unsolved murders in Washington state since Alcala had rented a Seattle area storage locker in which investigators later found jewelry belonging to 2 of his California victims in 1979. Other cold cases were reportedly targeted for reinvestigation in California, New York, New Hampshire, and Arizona. Sherry Ann Greenham, 20, was last seen in Waterville, Washington on the 14th of September 1976 after she was released from Douglas County Jail. A photograph found in Alcala's locker was shown to Greenman's family and they confirmed it was not her. Antoinette Jean Whitaker, 13, was a student who'd been living in a foster home when she walked out with an unidentified man on the 9th of July 1977. A week later, her body was found fully clothed and propped up on her hands and knees in a vacant lot in Lake City, Seattle. She'd been stabbed to death. There was no evidence that she'd been essayed. On the 17th of February 1978, Joyce Francine Gaunt, 17, was found at a picnic area of Seaward Park, Seattle. She was nude and lying on her face. Her skull had been crushed. She was a developmentally disabled teen who had also been beaten and strangled and essayed. She'd been living in a group home in Capitol Hill when she had last been seen leaving to meet with an unidentified man on the 16th of February. Exactly 42 years after his apprehension on the 24th of July 1979, Alcala died of a heart attack at a hospital in Kings County on the 24th of July 2021. He was 77 years old and waiting on California's death row.